Hello, and welcome to the Simple Index video on job configuration basics. In this video, we're going to go over the core set of steps that you need to go through in the job configuration wizard to create your first job and get things up and running. So we're going to look at primarily the first couple of tabs here, the input, the output, creating some indexes, and talk about logs a little bit. And that's really all we're going to go over in this video. So it's the basics. Those are the minimum things that have to be established in order to get a Simple Index job to run. So let's cancel out of this wizard here, and we're going to create a new job. And so the very first thing it asks is, what's our input type? So in the case of this demonstration, we're going to be working from some existing files already in a folder. And so we're going to just choose folder here. And at that point, it prompts us to go ahead and name this configuration. So it's saying we're saving it as a type of Simple Index configuration file. And so we're going to put it, there's an images folder on the C drive. So we'll just put it there, that's fine. And we're going to call it demo config. And we'll just put it right there and save. And that lets us move on to the next step. So here it's asking, what's my input folder? The files that I'm going to process, where are they coming from? So again, we can accept the default here, which is saying, go to that same place where I just saved the config, and there'll be a folder called input. That's fine. We can do that. Or if we prefer, we can actually go out and browse somewhere out on the drive and create it there. So if we wanted to, let's just say we had to manually search to that same spot. So we're going to go to the C, and we're going to go to images. And then right there, we could create that new folder. And we'll call it input. And we select OK. Now in this case, it's going to say that we can use relative paths. So do we want to keep this config file folder nomenclature that it gave us earlier? Just for the sake of the demo, let's turn it off. No. And so you can see it just puts in the exact path there. See images, and there's an input folder. We have a couple of options here. These are covered more in another video, but just to go over them real quick. Keep input files is handy when we're first configuring a job because you don't have to keep dropping test files back into your input folder. So we'll enable that one. And then split multi-page files is kind of what it sounds like if we were working with PDFs and we needed to look at every page within that PDF. We could split it up, but if we are just needing to look at information on the first page, then we can just not enable that feature. And that's really all we have to do as far as the basics of job configuration. Again, there's another video that deals with things in the advanced file input settings here, so we're not going to cover that right now. So let's next. And then we've got a couple of things from image enhancement. This is really dealing more with if you're working from a scanner or if the images that you're receiving from somewhere else have been scanned, and we need to take care of some issues like straightening them, despeckling them, rotating them. You can either do some automatic rotation where it finds the proper orientation for you, or you can force an orientation with these two settings here, and also blank page detection. A lot of time your scanner can do most of these features. So if it's something you're scanning yourself, it's a little easier and even a little faster, save some processing time to enable those settings on the scanner. However, Simple Index does have a good set of tools if you don't have that, or if these files came from someone else and you don't have control over how they were scanned. Let's move on. PDF processing, same thing. If you're working with PDFs that have come into you and you don't really know the nature of them, you've got some options here as far as making some conversions, changing some resolution, converting from other formats. But again, a little beyond what we need to do in this basics video, so we're not going to do any settings here. Let's move to the next one. So file output, where are we saving these files out? And it's the same thing. We can just use the option that's included there where it just goes to the configuration folder and places a folder called output there for us. That's fine, and we're going to leave that one this time. We'll just leave it on %config file folder %output. Then what type do we want to save out? So we've got several options as far as the kind of file that we can create. I'm just going to go with PDFs, which is the default. And then we have this question about existing files. So what that's saying is if we save out a file called testfile.pdf and that file already exists in our output folder, what are we supposed to do when that happens? The default we're seeing right here is append to end, so it'll just add more pages to that testfile.pdf and we'll just have one document in the output folder. But there are some other options. We can do numbered one-page files. So then I would get testfile-0001, for example, and it would keep them separate, so there'd be two files at that point. You can also add pages to the beginning of a file that's already in the output folder. So whatever we're working on right now would go to the front of the PDF that's already in the output folder. And then you can also overwrite, so we can replace existing files. So if you want to completely get rid of the one there because we're scanning in something totally new, that's the option. But most often, append to end is what we want. We just want to grow an existing file. And again, there's some advanced options available on this one, but we're not going to talk about them in this video. Let's move to the next step. Database. Again, something we're not going to cover in the basics video. There's other videos that deal with the database. Just know that if we need to, the values we're capturing in our index fields that we're about to set up, we could actually store those in a database and use them for searching later. You can also match against existing databases. If we have a list of customers, for example, we can look at the page we're working with and see if there's a customer name that already exists that matches in our database, so we know that's the right customer. So here's the core settings page that we want to look at for Simple Index. It's what indexes are we capturing and how are we going to use them in our file naming convention. So indexing and file naming. First option is right here. We see pre-index batch. That means if you want to run this job without the user taking a look at the scanned images and confirming the data, then you can turn on the pre-index batch, and that just lets it go through in a hands-free mode where it does all the processing, saves out the export files, and it's done. That's particularly handy in, let's say, like a barcode scenario. If you're doing a back file or something and you just have barcode separator sheets or something like that, with your index values, you can just let that one run hands-free, and it doesn't have to be confirmed by the user. But we're not doing that today. We're talking about a traditional job where there'll be a little verification. So we're going to go ahead and add our first index field. And here you have the different types. And for the purposes of what we're doing here, we're just going to make this the most basic job, and we're just going to put in text fields. And so text fields just means that the operator is going to key in some values. You see there's a lot of other ways we can get it. It can autofill would be coming in from a database, barcodes, if you have barcodes on the page. Dates, it's just matching a date format on there. OCR is a critical one. OCR is if you're wanting to read the text on the page. If it's machine created, or if it's a scan and you want Simple Index to do that conversion to machine created, that's what the OCR, so field types. But we're going to do text. And next. And here we just are going to name our field. So the first one we're going to have is, we're going to say the customer. And then here below it, it's asking what do we want to do with that index field value. If we make it required, it means that we can't go on, we can't skip that value on a given document. So if we wanted to move to the next page and we haven't entered a customer, it won't let us move to that next page. This value has to be entered each time. And then we have a couple other things here. We have forward, and forward means that there's later pages and we want to just apply the same value to the next page and the next page and the next page until we type in something else. So rather than having to retype it every time, we can just forward it along. We also have file name and folder. And so that means when we're doing the output, how do we want to use this value? Well, we want to make this value the folder level. So we're going to have a series of folders in our output location that are all named by the customer. And then we'll go on from there. And this is if we were setting any zones. So if we were doing ICR, OCR, barcodes, what have you, and we wanted to specify an exact location on the page where that'll be found, that's what you would do here. But again, in the basics video, we're going to skip on by that. Also, we have template control available. So if there was a pattern to the information we're looking for, if we were looking for an invoice number and it was always 3 letters and 3 numbers, we could set that template here and tell it to use that. And we can even do that with the text field. So we can force the users to type in a value that matches our template. And let's finish. And you can see it just puts this in our index field list, and there's the options over here as to how we're using it. So if you needed to change something, you don't have to step back through that sub wizard. You can just do the check boxes here. Simple enough. Let's add another field. And so again, we're just going to make it text. Next, and we'll call this one invoice number. And we'll make it required as well. We'll make it the file name that goes, so when we get into that subfolder, when we get into that customer folder, we're going to name our PDF by the invoice number. That's one of the values we're going to use to make that, put that name on there. And then what's next here? And we're going to skip zones again. We'll skip the template control. So now we have that one. And let's add one more. We're going to do text once more. Next. And we'll call this one the date. And we'll also make that part of the file name as we go out. And step on through, no zones, no template, and we've got our fields. So that's really all you have to do that's the most basic to kind of get a job set up. Now there are a few that we have to step all the way through this wizard to actually save this job, since it's the first time we're doing it. If we were editing, all of our fields would be available to us, all the tabs would be available, and we could just click directly on whatever option we need to change. A couple other things we have here. There's a field separator. So when we name that file we were talking about by invoice number -date, it's going to put a dash in between those values, and we can see that right here. So it's saying C images output, and then we have that folder we talked about. The customer is the folder level, and then it's going to put the invoice number, space, dash, space, and the date.pdf. So I could change that separator if I wanted an underscore, for example. I could do that. And then we also have a couple of options here as far as the performance of it. We have the images displayed while SimpleNX is thinking about them. That's if we were doing OCR operations or something and we wanted to see the images on the screen as it went through them. Makes the process a little bit slower, but it is something you can do. And we can also pull up the grid automatically rather than having to turn it on in our verification step. So it's saying when we're looking at these images, do we want to see the grid that shows us a list of all of them that are in the batch, or do we want to hide that grid and just have more screen space for our work? So let's step on through. In the next few, we're not doing any OCR here. This is where you would, of course, set up your options for the OCR, whether it's just going to be zones or if it's going to be the full page and that sort of thing. One other thing we might set in a basic job like we're doing now is the log folder. And you have two types of logs. You have an indexing log, which is just going to give you a CSV file or a text file, that sort of thing, that has all of the indexes that were entered for each document that went through the system. So if we have 10 output files, we'll have 10 lines in that file that tells us all the indexes we entered for each document. And then a batch log is more information about the batch itself. So how many pages were in it, how long did it take to process, what's the username of the person on this machine that did the processing, that sort of thing. And basically statistics. If you're doing some workflow monitoring to see how things are going, that was when you would enable a batch log. And again, those can be saved out in a few different formats. The default is an IDX, which is an index file, and then we can also do TXT, a CSV, XML is pretty common these days. So there we go. And then if we're doing any formatting, so if we're doing a CSV, you can tell it, to use a comma as a separator. There's a few other options that can be your separator between each of the fields, a pipe, a semicolon, a tab, that sort of thing. But we're not going to turn on a log here, but just know that this is where you would enable a log. And again, we have to give it a location for that log, so it's doing the %config file folder once more. And I'm just going to eliminate that. We won't make a log at all for this basic job. Next. Imprinting, if you want to add text on the page, that's there. Advanced settings, we definitely won't be getting into that in this video. This is just the basics. So do know that if you need to make some more advanced options within the auto numbering, processes that take place before and after SimpleNX runs, additional things with the indexing of the logging, also the database, and you can also have users log into the system each time they use it. That's all controlled in advanced settings. And of course, there are videos that cover that. And then finally, we're going to get to our last one, complete and save settings. So we're just going to go ahead and hit, and you can tell this is the file we're working on right now. If we hit finish, it's going to prompt me to save that one and go ahead and exit the wizard. And there it is. So you see that our index fields appeared over here. We have customer, invoice number, and date. And all we have left to do now is actually add some files to that input folder, and then we can run the job and see how it worked out. And there's a quick way to get to those different folders. We have under the view menu here, we can view the input folder. So SimpleNX will take me right to the folder. I don't have to go out and browse it on my Windows Explorer. So there's our input folder. I've actually copied some files to the clipboard, so I'm just going to paste those in. There we are. We have 3 TIFF files that are some scanned invoices. So let's go back to the job, and we'll run it. And in this case, there's really no processing to do, so it just brings each image in. And so now I can enter the customer name here, which is tech type. We can enter that invoice number, which is going to be the order number on the page here, 253642. And then we can also enter the date while we're at it, /03/2001. And we see this invalid file name message come up. That's because we chose to use the date as one of the values that's going to be in our file name, and file names cannot contain // like I've used there. So now it's just saying we're going to replace those characters with a dash, and this is the only time you're going to see that warning. So let's click OK here. You'll see it changed it. And so we can save the index, or we could press enter and it'll take us to the next page. So the same thing here, we're just going to put paper scan, and you can tab between these fields. So I just hit tab and put in 905767, and then we'll do the date on that one is 5-18-2002. Again, I could have put the slashes like it shows on the page and it would have converted those to dashes for me. We'll save the index, and then lastly, one source is the customer here, 766093. And then our date is 7-6-2003. There we go. So in some more advanced settings, as you look at some other videos here, you can find that all of this can be automated. So we could certainly have had OCR look at this value and picked out the business name for us. We could do the same thing with the order number and the date. We could also set a date template so that it would convert all dates that it finds to a common format if you wanted it as the 4-digit year and a 2-digit month and a 2-digit day. That's one of the things you can put in when you create a template in one of these fields. It's just going to take what we've entered here, since we're not doing any templating or changing it over. And so when we save the index for the last time, it says, all right, you've indexed all the files. Do we want to release this batch? Absolutely we do. And then again, we can just go under our view menu, go to that output folder. And there we have the 3 folders done by the customer name. And within that, we have an invoice number and a date making up our file name. So when you need to go look for these files, it's very semantic and you can find exactly what you're looking for. So that's pretty much it for our job configuration basics. You give a job an input and output location. You establish the indexes. What information am I capturing from that page, whether I'm keying it in or having it captured by other means. And then you also determine whether you want a log file or not. And that's really about it. It's pretty straightforward to get just a basic job up and going. I hope this has proved useful, and we'll talk to you in the next video. Thanks.